Day 6 of the July 99 7-day retreat in Springwater. The heat, the humming of fans, bringing some relief. The breathing, maybe a bit faster. Heart beating a bit faster from the heat. Rustling sounds in the room. The hands on the thighs, the feet on the mat. Any tension, pain, feeling of well-being. Are we here in all simplicity? Last night it was mentioned how difficult this work is because there is a felt resistance to looking. Going into oneself, one knows not how. And then someone said, what's so difficult about simply being here? The birds, the fans, the movement of air. Are we expecting something spectacular to happen to us? We are. We've heard it. That's maybe why we went into spiritual training and ending up here, a place of little discipline, which is missed by some people, particularly when one first comes in the course of the retreat. It may become more obvious that discipline, the real discipline arises from within when there is some interest to find out, to listen, to be here. Without being forced. Although, as somebody pointed out, being hemmed in on all sides in a spiritual training center, forced every step that one takes to take it this way, not that way, makes one really run into oneself, into one's protest and opposition, and maybe drop it because this is all discovering ego. $10,000 rules or more. To do this and not to do this, to behave like this and not like that. Is that necessary to discover ourselves? And no rules, or hardly any, does this mean there's the freedom to do what we want? And not being quite satisfied with that either. Because we can never do all we want. We always want more, and discontent follows on the heels. That's an amazing phenomenon. Sometimes the more freedom to do and to be, the more discontent that things aren't like this and should be or could be like that. One still finds those hems and borderlines. Outside of oneself. So, as one person asked in also a meeting yesterday, is there something that you can say that is really conducive to more attention, more awareness, more presence? Here. Does the concentration training imposed or given one, does that help? Or one may choose it to try it out oneself. Does it help to be more attentive, more aware, more present? Well, you have to try it out. Does it help? Don't ask me about it. I don't really know. Although I did go through training, but there was a certain holding the koan in the mind makes the brain hold on to something in a steady way, or else you can't look at this koan. If it's lost, then it can't work this way. So the brain did learn to hold on to things, to look at them. And as one progressed with koans, they became more and more complex. Not just the statement of a master, but master surrounded by his disciples of high achievement, so we were told, who all gave their comment on this particular statement that was made by the master. And to hold this all in the mind probably needed some training. I don't know. The mind got used to really looking without losing it. Or was it due to training? I don't know. This is what my teacher told me. I know in the course of years and years and years of giving talks, regardless of what training preceded it before, in the beginning it was not easy to remember what I had started saying. It sort of drifted away. And now it's quite amazing that the memory still holds this thing and allows it to be seen. What did I start out saying most of the time? So the brain learns to hold things, to look at them, to explore them by doing it. By doing it. And by doing the very thing that we want to become better at. Although my memory in everyday life is really pretty shoddy. I can't remember a lot of things, which is in a way a wonderful thing to be able to forget. Difficulties, what people said or did. First upset, dealing with it, and then forgetting it. It's marvelous. Never to bemoan unless there's a real brain deficiency. Never to bemoan a failing memory, as so many of us do. I'm getting old. My memory is getting poorer. Wonderful. Are you also forgetting your grudges that you're holding? You do begin to forget them if the mind doesn't keep going over and over and over them obsessively to garner some satisfaction of some sort by going over it in sort of a loopy way. to go over something, to clarify it and to increase understanding. That is a real intrinsic need in most of us. And to watch that it doesn't get into this looping around with the same thing without increasing understanding at all. Just making these synapses that connect in the brain thicker and thicker, so the likelihood of going over it is increasing rather than decreasing. The less we think about something once we've gone through it, the easier it can fade away from this brain. So, but the question was, I haven't forgotten. Is there something that helps with being more aware? And the simplest answer is yes, be more aware, be more aware. The more we are aware, the more we are aware. There is something, and it's not just an empty or clever saying. The body, mind, brain connections, what all is involved, the energies flowing, change with awareing and learn new ways of behaving different from our daily reactiveness, automaticness, coming from past experiences, and compulsively following lines of attack or defense or withdrawal. That's why I never tire of suggesting to people to meet together, not just to gossip. That's what we love to do. It gives us a feeling of communion if people share the same gossip or talking about others. But to explore something together. Now, a lot of people say, it's not my cup of tea, I hate these group meetings, nothing comes of it. I can't say that. Maybe in this whole history of having group meetings, there have been one or two, not a whole handful, which really, they were pretty awful. One of our first ones, somebody who had never been here before and has never been here since, sort of became almost immediately the teacher of the group, expounding and correcting. And I had a sinking feeling. It was one of our first experiments with group meetings. And there was particularly one woman there who I had very high respect for. She was a teacher herself, had a group, and very inward, very quiet, very wise. And typically, the way we are, I wondered, what does she think of this? What does she think of us for holding stuff like this? And she came to a next opportunity. She came to a private meeting. And I was sort of holding my breath. And she said, I learned so much yesterday. I had such a revulsion against this man that I didn't hear anything he said. I wasn't listening. I was only resisting and pushing away. How interesting, she said. So it was nice to see somebody making the most of something that seemed to be such a failure. So we can always learn when we get together and talk and inquire together, even though it may be very hard at times to listen to somebody. But it also sort of trains the listening muscle, if you will, to stay with it. Not to approve of it or disapprove of it or say, yes, you're right, this is not the point of listening. It becomes finer and finer, so one hears different layers vibrating with what a person says. Wanting to be important or putting oneself down or wanting to be center stage or whatever. Or it happens often with people, they say something and it rings so true. It really is right to the point, and the next time a person comes, they said, I hated what I said. I was trying to push myself or be somebody important. So it's interesting that something may come out of the moment, and then this doubting thought sets in, also habitually, probably putting oneself down. I made a fool of myself. I did poorly. I shouldn't have said anything. So to begin to learn to understand these movements of the mind, doubting and believing what the doubt says, being taken in by it. Because at that moment the depth of presence is not there. It's overlaid by doubting clouds about myself. I wanted to have come out well, and I didn't, says the retrospection. But, of course, it really is not everybody's thing, and we're not requiring anybody to come to group meetings in and out of retreat. It's a voluntary thing. But maybe this is just like the mind training of holding a koan in one's mind, to hold what people say in the mind and look at it. Look at it together. In a deepening way. I don't just mean superficial talk, although at times that's what we engage in. There's nothing wrong with it, but it is not this in-depth looking and listening and then allowing words to formulate what it is that's being seen or wondered about. And with doing it, more and more comes whatever. Being able to do it better, more present, more in touch, more concentrated, if you will, not just all over the place. By doing it, by participating in it, and voicing what one's doubts are or one's perceptions or whatever. Because I think we can all agree that being in a retreat in this marvelously quiet atmosphere, spacious, open, minimal rules or compulsions, no one watching one, although if one does get a note from the supervisor, is the mind interpreting it as being watched? Or will one just read the thing and consider to change what one was asked not to do this way or that, without making a big deal out of it, learning not to take everything so personal? That's a learning. That's what this person said, who was in a rough spiritual center where everything was ruled, and noticing one's objections, protest arising, and not expressing it, seeing it. If it's really seen, then it's fine. But if it's just swallowed, it's not fine. It festers underneath, eventually breaks out, often against somebody else who has nothing to do with it. So I was saying we can all agree that coming to a retreat is an amazing opportunity to come in touch with stuff that are not seen in our daily negotiations. We're very unaware of ourselves, of our closest habits. Maybe we become more aware of something, but our closest ways of reacting, responding, holding ourselves, very hard to illuminate in our daily life, because we have so much learned to protect ourselves, defend ourselves, or withdraw so as not to be hurt. And we're not aware of how we may be offending or hurting others with our ways. We're not aware of that. With the sound of our voice, the looks of our face, our body language. And to question that. Not just what they did to me, but is there something about my way of saying things or demanding or protesting or objecting that is abrasive or hurtful to others, or what is a word? I don't get it. Challenging someone else, or that's not quite the right word. That is a wonderful question to ask of oneself. Am I rubbing someone else wrong with my ways? What are my ways? How do I sound? And can one hear the sound of one's voice? Can one feel the tension of one's muscles, one's frowns? Yes, it's possible. It happens sooner or later with this work. That a smooth face is felt to contract. An easygoing voice is felt to get raspy or whatever. That's the first step, to hear it. Then one already may understand that somebody else's response doesn't come out of the middle of nowhere, which is what we usually think. Why did he or she get so excited? Not realizing that we're an integral part of this whole scene, all of us. So, in a retreat, there's more. The inner sounding boards are refined. One hears better in the silence. And in the energy that does gather, even though there are lots of thoughts, seems to be a hopeless case. People may feel that way, but there is energy gathering. We're not talking all the time. And looking and being with what seems to be the hopeless case, embracing it, at least at times. Maybe at the time of a talk when it's talked about. To let it all be, and let it all be embraced in one whole attention, awareness. And one may notice the greater acuity of the senses as one steps out of the house and sees the flowers and grasses and the animals and birds and deer with eyes that are more open than they usually are, less squinty. One sees it in people, how something relaxes around the eye muscles and lets them open up. When there's suspicion or fear of being hurt, they may close again, protectively. And not just the eyes. So, to be in touch, there's no better place than retreat, although I will not ever say this is the only place where this can happen. Because some people come to a retreat already naturally in tune with being quiet and observing inwardly. I've never done practice. And some people who have practiced and practiced for many years may not be in touch with themselves. So you never know. You start here, now. And let your past training do what it will. But this moment of fanning and birding and breathing is not determined by one's history. It's a totally new occurrence, never to come back again. So, this was all said in partially answering the question, is there something conducive to more awareness, more presence? But ultimately you have to find out for yourself. Not constantly watching and evaluating and grading oneself. Am I doing better, and am I progressing, and how am I doing? That sort of function of the brain is very useless, if you will. I remember sitting how many years ago, maybe 30 years ago, in the Zendo in Rochester, in the evening, trying to do my best to sit into the night, which was considered doing one's best, even though I was dreadfully tired. But there's something to tiredness can sort of flip to. If one wonders, what is tiredness? And when that happened once, this question coming up quite spontaneously, all of a sudden there was a lot of energy to look into this thing that one had habitually called tiredness. With this shift from suffering something to inquiring into it can release great energies. But that's not what I was going to talk about. I was going to say, sitting there and really noticing for the first time that even though it was quiet, relatively little activity of thinking, but then the brain quite periodically, rhythmically almost, clicking in, how are you doing? Are you doing all right? Where are you? Are you, etc. Our maintenance questions. Self-maintenance. And the realization occurred that that was not needed. There was all right not to know whether I was doing all right or what I was doing or whether I was here. And with that realization, that clicking in abated. And there was just this vast darkness of not knowing, which is open, spacious, totally undivided. And actually in talking about it, completely safe, because you know not of dangers. That's the activity of the discursive brain, which its function is to scan for danger. But for some reason there was no need for that. And this was not a one-time happening. This is very intimate now. This not needing to know how I'm doing, how I am, what I am. That's such a relief, just to be without knowing. And I'm talking right now about sitting here meditatively, or talking for that matter. Not talking about where we do need to know. A lot of things. We can't live our daily life without knowing, obviously. So please don't let that become a problem. That you think that's what I'm saying. I'm not. But still helpful. You know all about the situation now, to sort of put it aside for a moment and hear from others how they see the situation. And your feelings of what ought to be done and opinions, to suspend them, as it were, to hear other people's opinions. And then let some clarity decide. Not that one doesn't know and has millions of opinions, but can they for times be suspended? Question. I was going to talk, there's not much time left, I was going to talk about another question coming up for numbers of people. What is meaningful work? The search for meaningful work. Not that one doesn't have a job, which is okay, and one earns money with it. But there is this lingering question, is this as meaningful as it could be? And of course, a lot of people with whom I have contact change their jobs. They quit being computer people and become psychotherapists, or they quit being psychotherapists and become computer people. I'm just using this because it's always amazing how something that looms large as being fulfilling, satisfactory, after a while it fades. It is not what one had quite thought. And there is this propensity in this body-mind to get used to everything. It's not, whether it's relationship or a job, is not as exciting as it seemed to be in the beginning. To take that into consideration when one evaluates one's job, this process of jading over. It's always amazing how in a retreat this Springwater land does look different than when one works here all the time. There's a freshness in perception. So, meaningful work. Because what often comes to the mind of the searcher, the seeker, is artistic occupations. There is some space we hold in our mind for the painter or the writer or the actor. You can fill in more. That is sort of a special, that must be really the most fulfilling way of living. But when you read about biographical or autobiographical things, it's not so either. It isn't. It becomes work or drudgery, or it isn't what one thought it was. And that's not really what I was going to say. We think somebody who works creatively, they must have it. There must be something to that I don't have. We hold a very high value, maybe not so much in this culture, certainly where I grew up, the composer. Somebody who composes music, performs it, the virtuoso. There's some feeling that is really creativity at its best, and it may be. But it may also be in one's own imagination that alone is where creativity is possible and expresses itself. And I want to convey that creativity may have very little to do with the kind of occupation one chooses or takes. Because what is creativity? And is it tied to anything special? Any occupation, any activity special? I don't think it is. Even though we think this way and our thoughts are very overpowering, shared by society, by groups of people. I think creativity happens spontaneously when this body-mind is open to let happen what marvelously happens on its own, without these deliberate machinations of the wanting, willing mind. And is that something tied to any occupation, this openness of being? This presence, witness. Lots of room, because the me cycle is not taking all the room. It's making room for one knows not what. Then, does it happen that whatever one is engaged in comes alive? So that somebody's wearing a shirt, follow your bliss. And one thinks, I got to find my bliss out there and follow it. Maybe this bliss is nowhere to be found except operating spontaneously within, when there's openness and space to be in touch, inside, outside, with what's there, and letting it function marvelously. One knows not how or wherefore. So can ordinary human beings like you and me come upon this bliss of openness? I don't want to overuse the word bliss, so it doesn't become a concept. Blessing. And no word can describe it. Being alive with what's there. Whether it's lots of work or not so much work, that's another thing we suffer from. We think, and usually do, work too much. But often it is not just the amount of work we're doing, 8 hours a day or so, or 10 hours a day, 6 hours a day. It's not the amount. It's a certain resistance to it, or a story about it, a description of it, a jading over it, or comparison with others who work less. Of course, one can work too much, and I've recently discovered at times that one really gets exhausted and tired of doing one more thing. But the system regenerates itself. So far, it has. And it certainly is a relief not to comment and write headlines about one's doings. To not hook into that kind of a drudgery, but just do out of the moment what needs to be done. Also not, at certain times in one's life, not be so concerned over having time for oneself. This is a big issue these days. And I'm not saying it's a wrong issue. But for me right now, it isn't an issue. It can't be an issue. And it's a relief not to make a thing out of it. And it's amazing what little time periods open up in which there is lots of space and lots of joy, like watering the flowers. Which needs to be done. You could say, well, it's just one of my chores. How many more chores do I have? This is the wrong approach. Not to label it, not to know it, but just doing it spaciously. And the beauty of this being here without resentment taking over. And then when you come to a retreat, sometimes people who work here say, I wish I could come to a retreat again and not work here. That was so wonderful. I had no job, I just retreated. No, now there's something to that. It doesn't have to think, it doesn't have to have responsibility, but for me this retreat has been the most wonderful retreat, even though I do work over 6 hours a day. Doesn't matter. There's so much time to walk, time to nap, time to eat without having to do the dishes, time to meet with people and not be totally exhausted either, time to visit Kyle, drive there back and forth. It all happened in enormous space without the pressure of thinking about it in certain terms. It was really a wonderful discovery that this is possible. Oh, I've talked much too long. We will end here for today.